Today we are going to be pitting ChatGPT against Sudowrite to see which one does better prose. Let's get into it. Alright guys, it is finally here. The day has arrived. We are finally going to write chapter 1 of this series, The Omnimancer, which we've been developing over the last couple of videos. And in this episode, we're specifically writing chapter 1 twice in two different programs. I'm going to do it in ChatGPT, specifically ChatGPT Plus, so we can use GPT-4. And we're going to be using Sudowrite, which is the leading software out there for AI writing for fiction authors. And we're going to be looking at the differences between the two and which one does a better job. So we'll start here with ChatGPT. We're going to be using the GPT-4 model. You can try this in the GPT 3.5 if you don't have ChatGPT Plus, but I highly recommend you at least get ChatGPT Plus because GPT 3.5 just is not good enough to make this worthwhile, in my opinion. I've tried it with GPT 3.5, and while it can help you get past that blank page syndrome, overall it is not nearly as good, and it will require a lot more editing after you've written the whole thing. And so that's why I don't particularly like to use it, but you can do that. In today's video, we're definitely going to be using GPT-4. Now, let's take a look at Sudowrite, for example. In Sudowrite, we're going to be using this thing called Story Engine, which is currently not available to the public yet, but will be very soon. One of the things that you can do in Story Engine, first of all, you fill out all this stuff, and you can use AI to help write that stuff already, but we've already done all of the work in developing our synopsis, our characters, our outline. See past videos if you're interested in seeing that. What we do here in Sudowrite is we create these, what they're called, commands. So you get your outline, right? And this is the first part of our outline. This thing where it says part 1 is going to be chapter 1. And so this is basically what's going to happen in the chapter we're about to write. Lyra Thorne is nervous about her first attempt at raising the dead as part of her necromancy training. While in the mess hall at the academy, she confides in her friend Delara about her doubts, etc., etc., etc. So what you do is you can pull that over here. This is the same text here. And then you come down here to commands, you hit generate, and it will give you, I think it's about 12 different points. And every single one of these, you can think of it like a story beat. This represents 200 to 300 words of the finished manuscript. So for every one of these, it's going to write 200 to 300 words in Story Engine. I'll show you exactly how this works. So let's go ahead to part 2. This will be chapter 2. Hit start scene, and it takes us over to another thing which has the information we've got here. So this is the basic summary. If we want to expand this into our individual story beats, we hit generate and let that go for a minute. Okay, so it has now written these 12 story beats or commands, and it only used up almost 300 words here, but you can see in this space you can have up to 2,000 words. So you can go to town just fleshing these out, changing them, adding more of them. I usually like to add some commands on things to get descriptive about. So like for instance, in this first one, Lyra nervously enters the ritual chamber. I would maybe give some details about what this ritual chamber looks like so it knows that when it's writing. Otherwise, it's just going to make stuff up. And so that's what you can do. I have already done that for chapter 1 here. You can see there's a lot more text here, and I even added a few beats. Now, the reason we're doing this first and adding these story beats is because I want to use the same prompts in ChatGPT that we are using in Sudowrite so we can compare the overall quality of the text afterward. So that is why I'm doing this. We're going to be using this in ChatGPT to come up with our text. But keep in mind that if you wanted to create story beats like this using ChatGPT, you could do that. That's just a different step. I find it easier to use in Sudowrite just for demonstration purposes for this video, so that's why I'm doing that. But let's go back to ChatGPT. And we're going to need a prompt for this. Now, if you have my prompt guide that you can get at nerdynovelist.com, you can get the guide that the prompt that I have. Here I have it all listed and ready to go. This is I've already pre-filled this in with most of the information we need. Write 1,000 words of a chapter using the following details. It's going to be epic fantasy. The tone is moody in a style of a young adult fantasy. Point of view is first-person point of view from Lyra's perspective. The setting is the mess hall of the Bright Hall Academy. We have some key characters listed here. And then I've left the summary blank for now. I'll get to that. And then we have some information on the conflict. What's the source of the conflict in the scene? And then I end it with this bit that says, make sure to have plenty of realistic dialogue and to be sure to show, don't tell, and use deep point of view. Write in a very slow pace, building the story with in-depth character development and world building. And that's just a little extra paragraph that I add there. It kind of tends to make the quality of the prose just a little bit better. And showing a lot more than it tells, which is important. So we're going to go ahead and copy this prompt and put it into ChatGPT. Now remember, we have to fill out the summary, what is actually happening in this scene. So to do that, we're going to go back here to our commands, and I'm only going to select the first two. Now the reason for that is because remember, these represent 200 to 300 words each. And I have found that, despite telling ChatGPT to give me 1,000 words, it really only gives me about 600 or so, sometimes a little less. And so that tracks with about 2 of these. And so I'm going to copy those and enter in those into our summary area. And that's all we need to do here. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so it's done writing everything I've told it so far. Interestingly, it completely went off the rails at the end. All of this stuff about the sadistic figure of Master Carol Blackthorn loomed in the doorway. I think it got that from the character descriptions that I gave it. But that was not in the description I gave it, so I'm not even going to copy and paste that. And that is one of the downsides of using ChatGPT, is it tends to do that. And we're going to copy this into our document. I am using Atticus for this because this is where I will do all of my editing and final formatting and everything. I am associated with Atticus, just so everyone knows. I work for Kindlepreneur and Dave Chesson, who is the owner, part owner of Atticus. And so I am, of course, associated and mildly biased there, but I do think it's a great program. I do not receive a financial kickback from recommending it to you. I don't have any affiliate links or anything like that, but I am associated with them. Enough about that. So we have this little bit. It was only 460 words. Now, that might be because their servers are a little bit having trouble right now. That's another downside to ChatGPT. I noticed it was writing very slowly, and sometimes it throttles things. What can you do? Okay, that's just the way it works. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process. So we can go back to ChatGPT, copy this prompt again, paste it in here, and then go over here and copy the next 2 of these and paste those in there, and then hit go, and it'll start writing. It's trying to go off at the end of the last prompt that I gave it. This is interesting. So it's trying to continue exactly where it left off, but it had already gone too far, farther than I wanted it to. Now you could, of course, edit that, and that's going to take a little time to edit that through and make that transition more seamless. But it is causing some problems because now it thinks we're outside of the mess hall where it's supposed to be taking place, and this scene is not supposed to take place there. So, that's one of the things that can happen. It's a little bit more unpredictable when you're using ChatGPT. But what are you going to do? All right, I'm just going to let this go and then continue to write the remaining sections of this chapter using ChatGPT, and I'll get back to you when I'm done and let you know how long it took. All right, we are done with everything given to us by ChatGPT. This was interesting. I had actually already done a test run of this last night. I was playing around with this and I used it, and it did a much better job then for some reason. This time it kept trying to steer in a different direction, and then I would course correct it, but it kept trying to steer away. And so it ended up being a little bit of a jumbled mess, and I wish I could convey that to you a little bit better in video form. But I really can't really. You have to sort of read through it. Maybe I will have the transcript of this available. But needless to say, it needed some work, and particularly with the transitions. So because I'm only writing at about 500, 600 words at a time, it had difficulty knowing to transition smoothly from one section to the next because it didn't always know where it was going. And sometimes it would get to the end of a section and then it would keep going, try to invent its own plot, which I didn't want it to do. And then it would try to loop that into the next section, which I also didn't want it to do. So it ended up being a little bit of a mess. Now, I will say the quality of the narration from one paragraph to the next is still very, very good. The description's good. The dialogue is mostly good. There's a lot of sort of melodrama, you could say. A lot of like, oh, we are so awesome, and I love you, and we're going to be the best, and you can do it kind of speech, which I don't particularly care for. That's one of the things I will definitely be editing down. But overall, the quality of the prose is pretty good, and this is why I think GPT-4 is a game changer for fiction authors, is because it does write pretty good prose. Now, prose is not the only thing that we need, however. This was a bit clunky, and so we're going to go to Sudowrite now and see what it does. Now, we're going to be using these exact same commands. These are the same commands that we used, and with these, we're going to be able to write the entire scene in a single click. So let's do that right now. Okay, we are done. We have now finished this whole thing. So let's go ahead and talk about the difference between these different approaches. Now this wrote about 2,700 words. When I tried this before, it actually wrote a little more, so that's a little surprising to me. And with ChatGPT, we wrote 3,600 words. So we were able to write more with ChatGPT, but I will say ChatGPT was going off the rails a lot more, whereas Sudowrite was able to stay on topic for the most part. It did go a little off the rails at the very end, but that's to be expected, I think. In between each section, it was not going off the rails. It was sticking to everything exactly as it should. So that's a really good thing. As far as the quality of the prose, I'd say they're kind of about the same. Each paragraph, the dialogue, it's all about the same level of quality. But as I said, Sudowrite was able to stick to the task a lot better. Let's talk about time. So I didn't mention this before, but when I was doing everything with ChatGPT, it took me about 13, 14 minutes to write the whole first chapter. That's 3,000 words. This time, with Sudowrite, it took about 8 minutes. So that's about a 5-minute difference, which doesn't sound like much, but Sudowrite did write faster. I will say this. I didn't have to be here for those 8 minutes, right? I could have just come here to where it says generate and just hit generate and let it go. And then maybe I could have moved on to chapter 2 and started working on these commands while it's writing chapter 1. And then once I've got these commands, I can go ahead and hit generate here to start writing chapter 2. And then I move on and write the commands for chapter 3. I could make this a very, very interesting cycle that goes through everything. Now, this is not perfect prose. Okay, there are a number of conversations in here. I'm just like, no, definitely not that. But as a starting place, it's phenomenal that it can do what it can do. And this is going to save so much time, but it's just going to require maybe an extra editing pass. So if you look at how long you spend on editing, it's going to require a little more time in the edit, but the amount of time you save in the prose writing is going to be so far reduced. I know people who rewrite 100% of the prose after using this tool to create their prose in the first place. And that might sound like you're actually giving yourself more work because you produce it in AI first and then you add your own prose on top of that. But it ends up being faster because you kind of know where the scene is going. And you don't really have to think about a lot of things. You don't have to think up a lot about the dialogue or the description and all that. All you do is you just follow. It's like having a very, very detailed outline. So even if you're one of those people that revise 100% of the thing, you're still going to be doing it faster because you don't have to be sitting there and thinking about what comes next all the time. And so that is one great advantage of AI in general. Sorry, that's a bit of a tangent. So, ChatGPT versus Sudowrite, which one is better? Well, the prose is about the same in both ones. They come up with similar output, although in this particular example, Sudowrite did not produce quite as much, but it's similar. Sudowrite is faster, and you can kind of set it to generate and then go and do something else. So as far as the actual work that goes into it, it's just a click of a button essentially, whereas with ChatGPT you have to keep crafting your new prompts and feeding it each section as you go and then copying and pasting everything out of there. And so it's a little bit more work as you are generating the chapter. You kind of have to be there, you have to be present while it is writing, whereas with Sudowrite I could hit generate and then go do something else. And so that's a big advantage that Sudowrite has over ChatGPT. And overall, the biggest thing for me is the fact that it can take all of those sections and string them together more or less seamlessly. There isn't nearly as much of an issue with the chatbot going in a totally different direction and then trying to steer it back into the way you want to go. And that is the main reason why I will be using Sudowrite to write the remainder of this book. I still recommend ChatGPT, in particular ChatGPT Plus, for those who are brainstorming novels, coming up with characters, and creating your outline, because Sudowrite will do a lot of those things as well, but I actually prefer the back and forth discussion format that ChatGPT provides. But when it comes to writing prose, really you can't argue with Sudowrite. I tend to not like the subscription model that Sudowrite has, where it gives you a finite amount of words, and that's another reason why I recommend ChatGPT to do all your brainstorming and stuff, because you don't want to burn through those words in the process. Simply coming up with all this prose, this used up almost 3,000 words here in just one click of a button, and so it's easy to burn through all your words in Sudowrite if you're not careful. Whereas with ChatGPT, you essentially have unlimited words for the $20 you spend. So there is that advantage. If you are okay with writing, trying to handle ChatGPT for writing prose, it can be a bit of a wrestle, but you can do it if you really don't want to pay the money for Sudowrite. It's just going to require a little bit of editing. But as for me and for this project, I am going to be writing the rest of this book in Sudowrite using this method that I outlined here. So I hope you enjoyed that. I am not going to be making any more videos about this until the book is finished. And I'll get back to you and we'll see how long that takes. But until then, I will see you in the next video.